Good evening. I'm Beth Hillman, the President and CEO of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, and it's my great privilege to welcome you to the kickoff of an incredible upcoming season of winter and spring programs here in the museum. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our museum members and also to the viewers tuning in via our live web broadcast. I want to extend a special thank you to 9/11 Memorial and Museum trustees Rick Clark and Ann Tatlock. I also want to note Visionary Leadership Council members who are here with us this evening, Rob Peretta and Zach Reber. Tonight's program focuses on national security. It explores the challenges that face the United States today and the role of the intelligence community in addressing those. There's no one better equipped to help us understand this challenging landscape than the head of U.S. intelligence, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, along with former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Trustee, Jeh Charles Johnson. I want to express my personal appreciation to Secretary Johnson. He's partly responsible for bringing me to the 9/11 Memorial Museum because he was on the search committee of the board that brought me here a year and a half ago. He's also been a great partner since I arrived at the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and he's been a steady source of support and expert guidance to not only me, but to many others across the Memorial Museum and the 9/11 community. I'm grateful too for his leadership as the co-chair of our annual Summit on Security, which takes place each November. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And then this evening's special guest, who is no stranger to the Memorial and Museum. Sworn in on January 21st, 2021, Director Haines is the 7th Senate-confirmed Director of National Intelligence in our nation's history. She's also the first woman to hold that position, and previously was the first woman to serve as Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency and the first woman to serve as the Assistant to the President and Principal Deputy National Security Advisor. She's a native New Yorker, and she's lived a life of impact and meaning that reflects the global breadth and cultural depth of our city. During her distinguished career in public service, Director Haines has worked in all 3 branches of government, in and outside of the intelligence community, and in academia. Most recently, she led the Transition's National Security and Foreign Policy team, and served as a member of the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. Director Haines, it's an honor to have you back on this stage. We're also honored to welcome back Secretary Jeh Charles Johnson. From 2013 to 2017, he served as the 4th Secretary of Homeland Security, leading over 230,000 employees in 22 different components and agencies. He managed to raise morale and build a more effective, cohesive DHS. Prior to leading DHS, he served as General Counsel of the Air Force and General Counsel of the Department of Defense. He's been widely recognized as an exceptional leader, including with the American Lawyers Lifetime Achievement Award, the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, and the New York State Bar Association's Gold Medal Award. He's currently a partner in the law firm of Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, LLP. Both Secretary Johnson and DNI Haines are invaluable partners to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. We've had long-standing connections with ODNI, the IC, and DHS through our professional programs, a foundation we'll continue to build in the years ahead. I'd like to thank you both for your hard work, your vision, and your lifelong service, and for agreeing to share your wisdom with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming DNI Avril Haines in conversation with Secretary Jeh Johnson.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Is my mic on? Yes. Okay, great. Before I forget, and I'm going to do this again at the end, I'm going to ask everyone remain seated at the end of the program while the director exits the room. I got that out of the way. Okay. But I'm going to come back to that. Okay. So, first of all, Beth, thank you very much for your exemplary, where did you go, Beth? Oh, there you are. Thank you very much for your exemplary leadership of this organization, of this wonderful organization. You're doing great things. You know, you've transplanted yourself into a New Yorker, and the trustees have immense confidence in you. So thank you for everything you've been doing. Hear, hear. Okay, so the fun part of this for me is simply introducing Avril Haines to you. I will begin by saying Avril Haines is, in my experience and in my observation, one of the, if not the, finest public servants I have ever worked with. She's an extraordinary human being also. First of all, and I hesitate to say this about our nation's top spy, she's one of the nicest people I know. One of the nicest, most self-effacing people I know. One of the most decent people I know. I hope I'm not condemning you by saying all of that.
But you're, making me very uncomfortable. I'm just
But the smile and the warm face is genuine with Avril. I've never seen her lose her cool or lose her temper. And I know there have been moments that we've been together where everybody else would have lost their cool, have lost their temper. She's one of the most decent people I know. She's one of the finest public servants I know. And even before she became DNI, she's had an extraordinary life. Now, this is where I start to embarrass you. She grew up on the Upper West Side, native New Yorker. She's from here. Welcome home.
Thank you.
Growing up, she decided to take judo lessons. She's experienced, so don't mess with her. At one point, she decided to work as a mechanic in an auto shop, building automobile and repairing automobile engines. Yes. She and her future husband, Dave, met in flight school. She's a pilot. If recollection serves, I believe I read, and I didn't know this because you never told me, that you and Dave once flew a single-engine aircraft north of the Arctic. Is that correct?
Well, we tried.
You tried. Okay. Right.
We ended up in Greenland.
But
that was.
She and Dave took up, owned a bar in Baltimore, which then became Baltimore's premier independent bookstore. Went to school, went to law school. I first met her when she was deputy counsel to the National Security Council in 2011, excelled in that job, then became counsel to the NSC beginning in 2011, excelled in that job, then was nominated by the president for what I know was her dream job, which was to be State L, to be the legal advisor to the State Department, but got pulled back from that job to be deputy director of the CIA, then got pulled out of that job to come back to the White House as deputy national security advisor up until the end of the Obama administration, then came home to New York, was with Columbia World Projects for about 4 years, and was today, in 2021, appointed by President Biden to be the Director of National Intelligence. This is a real treat. She rarely does public interviews. I think that's correct.
Yes.
And so we're going to get the benefit of her wisdom and knowledge and experience, all unclassified in this session. So Avril, Director Haines, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this. I hope you find this interesting and worthwhile.
I feel like I should leave now because it's pretty much all downhill from here, but I am.
Now, I didn't want to ask her any hard questions. I didn't want to ask her any curveballs. I didn't want to embarrass her. I didn't want to put her on the spot. I don't necessarily want her to make news here, but I do have to ask about one thing. I have to ask about a classified matter that the president the other night decided to talk about. And I have to ask you to comment on this classified matter, and please elaborate on what the president said the other night. Is it true, he said it was classified, that Taylor Swift is going to endorse him?
I think if the president said it was classified, I can't discuss it. I'm fairly sure that's within his.
Okay. So on to my real questions here. When our government created DNI right after 9/11, and here we are at ground zero, right after 9/11, our government created the DNI. At the time, I thought that it was an unnecessary additional layer of bureaucracy in the intelligence community that we really didn't need. You have the CIA director, you've got DIA, you've got a bunch of other intel agencies, and Congress created this additional layer of bureaucracy. And I thought, this doesn't seem necessary. In my personal experience, observing the DNI and observing the bureaucracy post 9/11, working on a daily basis with this bureaucracy, as of the point I left government in 2017, I thought, and Jim Clapper was the DNI, I thought, okay, this seems to be working, but it still seems to be working because of the personalities involved, and that the structure and the bureaucracy really hadn't been institutionalized, and it therefore the success of it all depends on who the director is and how well the director plays with others in the sandbox. Here we are 7 years later, what's your
Perspective
perspective on all of that?
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be back home, and incredibly, it's lovely to frankly be back at the 9/11 Museum, and the work that we get to do with this museum is extraordinary. And I can't tell you how often I hear from particularly our National Counterterrorism Center just how much they love having the opportunity to come here with their folks and give them a sample of the education and the framing and the way in which this museum kind of respects the history that they feel they were born out of in so many respects. And also to say, there is nothing I wouldn't do for Jay, but also just one of the most extraordinary people I've had the great pleasure to work with, and somebody I've learned so much from, and I will leave it at that. I am, more than happy to be here. So on your question, I do think people continue to matter. There's no question about that. And I don't think that that's a feature only of ODNI and the IC. I mean, I see that across government in a variety of different ways. I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons why it was especially important in the early years is because you were taking power away, in effect, from the CIA and from DOD, and putting it into the ODNI, and that made you very unpopular for a variety of reasons. And it was also, as an organization intended to integrate and to facilitate the sort of breaking down of stovepipes across a series of elements, it is also, you tend to be not the doer, but the facilitator, and that's also a very kind of, challenging space to occupy in many ways. But I do think that in this moment, at the very least, I am deeply grateful, frankly, so first of all, to the fact that I have some of the most extraordinary colleagues to work with, between Bill Burns as the director of CIA and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and also, the Undersecretary for Intelligence and Security, and Ron Moultrie, and others. And all of us, the fact that we get along so well and that we have a kind of an understanding of what we're all trying to achieve makes a difference. There's no question. But I have also, from this position, seen the extraordinary value of ODNI, and the mechanisms through which we do the work that we do, I think, have solidified in ways that were not true when you were watching it in the early days. And so quite agree that we have kind of graduated. But I thought to touch on three things that may not be as obvious to folks looking at it from the outside, but that you will understand well and be interested in your thoughts about it. Because I think this is, one of the questions is, so what does ODNI do? What's the value that it's bringing in many respects, and how do I think about that? And one of the things that we do, so we're responsible for the President's Daily Brief, right, which is a kind of a manifestation of the extraordinary work that happens across the community And there are 18 elements, including OD&I. So it's a big community, right? You've got CIA, FBI, NSA, NGA, NRO, like, alphabet soup of different ones. But you've also got
INA,
INA and DHS, exactly. You've got Treasury has an intel component, State has an intel component, Department of Energy has an intel component. You have the services that have their intelligence piece. So it is, it's extraordinary in this respect. And the thing that I'm using the PDB to describe is the fact that most of the articles done in the PDB, the majority, are written by the CIA and then coordinated through the community. But there are increasingly, over the years, work that comes from other elements that the CIA participates in. What the PDB does and what our office does for analysis in different spaces is it really helps us to actually use things like the PDB, or when policymakers ask us to do coordinated projects for them, to lift out where there may be debate in the community on a particular issue and drive a process that provides to policymakers like, a Secretary Johnson or, a variety of the president, so on. Here's the analysis, but you're not just getting one element's perspective. You're getting an analysis that reflects the best sort of thinking across the community, and here are where there are maybe differences. And that, I think, is really valuable to folks, and that is something you need a central entity to do in that piece. That's number one. Number two is one of the things about the pull from DoD was that basically part of my role in this position is you're running the National Intelligence Program budget, and that is the budget that exists for a lot of the Defense Combat Support Agency and other defense elements that are part of the IC. Most of their budget, but not all of their budget in many circumstances, may come from us. So for NSA or DIA or other things like that. That's an awkward position for the Department of Defense in some respects. They were not thrilled about that prospect because there's a perspective of, are they really going to be serving us, or are they going to be serving the broader government? And how can we be sure that, DIA is going to be providing intelligence analysis and work that serves us? And part of the structure is intended to say, actually, the intelligence community serves national priorities that are set by the president. Those national priorities, while set by the president, are worked through by the interagency, and that is ultimately how we're trying to allocate resources across the community to ensure that those national priorities are set. The vast, vast majority of our work does go to the Department of Defense. That's the reality. But there are places where you want to have an opportunity for somebody to be looking across that space and trying to make sure that those national priorities are being met. And increasingly, we see how, next one, the different INTs for which you have different functional managers across the intelligence community. CIA is the functional manager for human intelligence, NGA being the functional manager for GeoInt, NSA, the functional manager for SIGINT. All of these relate to each other and work off of each other. And when you have an OD&I that's able to work across the community, you're able to actually help them leverage each other's work in ways that allow us to sort of be better than the sum of our parts, add up to, ultimately what is going to serve a mission that is broader. So, and then finally, the last thing is we have so many issues in our intelligence community space where we are trying to think about the long-term investments that need to be made for the country so that we have the right intelligence community for the future. And what I get to do is pull together the XCOM, as we call it, the heads of the communities, and we decide on a strategy. We think about what are the key investments that need to be made long-term, what is the vision that we have for that. And I think that's an extraordinary opportunity to be able to help promote that in a comprehensive way. So does that make any sense to you? I mean, especially as somebody who's been like the government,
the thing that I came to relatively late in the game, reading Intel every morning, was you'd read an Intel product written by one agency, and then there'd be a dissent by another agency. And I'd look at these, and on a CT matter, I'd say to my folks, okay, bring the analyst who wrote this, and then let's bring the analyst who wrote the dissent to one of my meetings.
Yeah.
And, like a week later, this one analyst, very nervous, shows up who authored the one opinion, and then the other analyst who authored the dissent. And I'd ask, okay, you say this, explain that, and you say that, explain that. And very often I'd find out there wasn't that much difference between the two once you put them in the room together.
Interesting.
But it also was a good exercise because it helped me more, and the folks at DHS more thoroughly understand the intel.
Yeah.
And it was a good exercise, and I thought it was a healthy exercise. Some people might think, well, if they're not all saying the same thing, seeing the same thing, something's wrong. But they're just different ways of looking at the same piece of intel. Anyway, so when I was in office, everybody used to ask me, what keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night? I'm not going to ask you that, okay?
Thank you.
Because I'm sure there are plenty of things that keep you up at
exactly.
night. The question that somebody once asked me, which I thought was a good question, was, right now as we sit here, how big a gap is there between what you know in your world and what I know from public sources, reading the New York Times and David Sanger and everything? Is it like this or is it like that? Or, I'm not going to ask you that either. I will ask you this. I'll ask you the more direct question.
I miss you.
In unclassified terms, can you tell us, Avril, what do you see as the biggest threat to our domestic security today?
It's interesting. Okay, the honest answer to this is some of the dysfunction in government is what I see as one of the most challenging things for us.
That's what I was going to say, and that's what I have said.
Is that right?
The dysfunction in our democracy is the biggest threat to our national security.
And part of the reason I say this too, in many respects, it's probably obvious to people, and it's clearly how you think about it too. But it is the landscape is evolving at a rapid rate, and we are facing an incredibly challenging world right now in so many different ways. And I can, give you the sort of riff on how we try to think about that. But the reality is that from my perspective, we have extraordinary talent in the government. We have extraordinary capacity. We have, without question, institutions that are sometimes challenged and don't work exactly the way you want them to, and all of those things are absolutely true. But when we're facing a threat, such as a 9/11, we come together, we know how to address it, we, have built the muscles to put it together. It's one of the things that inspires me and makes me love national security. And yet, we can be our own worst enemy in some respects as we watch some of the dysfunction, and we can't get a budget. We have to go through the process that we do. It's very challenging, and there are good people in Congress too that are trying to make things work. But it is there's no question that I spend a lot of time trying to think about how we can manage around that dysfunction so as to be able to enable the folks that can actually address the real national security issues. What do you,
I used to say that it will take a crisis to bring us together. And we had a crisis called COVID, and we didn't come together. And this is coming from me, not her. We quickly divided over whether to wear a mask, whether to get vaccinated or not. There was no common understanding. And after that experience, I actually worry that if 9/11 were to happen in 2024, our country would not mobilize and unify like it did after 9/11. I worry that we'd have arguments on social media about who did it. Was it Al-Qaeda? Was it some other organization that plotted this? But I agree with you that I think the single biggest challenge to our domestic security is our polarization and our dysfunction in our government's ability to respond on behalf of the American people.
Yeah, and one sort of, a light for and hope after this depressing exchange.
Right. Cheer us up, please.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Like the one thing I would say is I have to tell you that the intelligence community's relationship with its oversight committees, both SISI and HPSI, is extraordinary. We have bipartisan work. We give briefs on a bipartisan basis. They accept briefs on a bipartisan basis.
Yes.
Both the chair and ranking of SISI and HPSI have come to talk to us in the workforce. We've done things together. It is. I am so grateful for their capacity to work with us on that basis and to actually support the work that we do. And it is a moment of, like, to say that there are moments when it works. There's no question. It's just that it is.
It is true that there
right.
are people on the Intel oversight committees who tend to have a nonpartisan approach to their work.
Yeah.
At least when they deal with you. When
Well,
right.
It's, I mean, I don't, and there's lots of, I think it is not probably the greatest thing to do for your political career to go onto the Intel committees, because you're not doing a lot of open hearings and you tend to not be seen as much in your thing. And people are attracted to it, presumably because they think it's the right thing to do and they supporting national security issues. So it's already, to some extent, you get a self-selecting group in some way. But it's also...
you never have to testify before the Judiciary Committee, for example.
That is true.
Right.
But but it's also, I do think that the fact that we do things behind closed doors for the most part because we have to, not always. We'll do the annual threat assessment hearings coming up in the next few months. And but when we're dealing with classified matters, which is a lot of obviously what we're dealing with, and I think that also engenders a different kind of conversation sometimes, which,
Right. Okay, so same question, unclassified. Our global security.
They're all unclassified, right? I mean, I'm
They're
just
all
checking.
unclassified.
I don't know, like, okay,
I just
sorry.
want the audience to know
Just
that
checking.
you're not letting them in on something that...
Yes, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So how would you answer the same question with respect to our global security? What do you see as our biggest threat, our biggest challenge to our global security today?
Yeah. So here is kind of how I think about the landscape, and then we can dig into whatever aspect of this you think. I mean, I think it will not surprise you that that we would say that right now we are in an incredibly complex and very interconnected threat landscape globally. It is in part characterized by a kind of an accelerating strategic competition between major powers. It is also characterized by intense and increasingly unpredictable transnational threats that, again, are interconnected often with the state to state and strategic competition piece. And third, a number of regional conflicts that have far-reaching impact. And you sort of have this that landscape that I've just described of really those sort of three pillars of challenges that, again, interact with each other. And you have to then pile on emerging and disruptive technological development, environmental changes, right, and economic strain that is, manifested, particularly coming out of the pandemic around the world in different ways. And what it does for us in particular is it makes, it is not only in effect less stable, but it's also very challenging to forecast. And that is really fundamental to our job, is kind of, the indication and warning of particular issues. And given how complex the landscape is and how often things are interacting with each other, it makes it much harder for us to manage. But those are sort of, that's the very broad base. And then we can dig into any aspect of that you think is of interest or useful.
The situation in the Middle East is obviously very volatile right now.
Yeah.
One of the questions on my list to ask you is, what's your take on what was obviously an intel failure by the Israeli government to detect what was going to happen on October 7th?
I mean, honestly, my first reaction is, but for the grace of God, right? Like, in other words, I felt so much, as I suspect many of my colleagues did, for the Israeli intelligence services in that moment. It is so hard to, this is exactly what you work to do, is to provide indication and warning, and you can miss it. There's just no question, even as much as we work on these issues. They were tracking tensions, there's no question. That was a part of what we're all doing, and I think they are now going through an exhaustive review of exactly why did they miss it, what are the lessons that they can learn, all of those things, and that takes time. One of the challenges for all of us, I think, is when we do miss something, going through that process, you often you try to rush to judgment because you're constantly being asked, what did you do wrong? And, there's lots of theories. Was it because we relied too heavily on technical collection? Should we have thought about the human piece more? Are there other things that should have been, there's a variety of, everybody's got a view in a sense, but I think it's going to take some time to get through those things and try to understand how things
in general terms, what are the hallmarks of an intelligence failure? How does that happen to a sophisticated service, a sophisticated intelligence community like the Israelis, like ours? Is it lack of imagination? Is it sleep at the switch? Is it a combination of things?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
I mean, so separate from October 7th, just looking at intelligence failures more generally,
terms, right.
It's all of the above and some. In other words, I think there's no question that failure of imagination, in sort of, as has been famously stated in relation to our own 9/11 and different things, is certainly a scenario that one imagines. And we do so much to try to avoid that. I'll kind of go through a few of these, but just to say, like, we do black swan reports. We try to look at what are the, low probability, high impact scenarios. What are the things that we're not thinking about? We try to do red cells to try to change our basic assumptions to see if we can enforce that. But there are times when you end up with, you didn't consider this interaction often that creates the following events. Another is, asleep at the switch is to, I think you can become complacent about certain things, right? There is also, we've thought about in certain areas where, if you're a lawyer, this may resonate with you outside of the intelligence community. That's sort of the closest analogy I can think for this sort of scenario. But when analysts get to a key judgment, they have an analytic line about something. A particular country is, for example, we assess that they are not seeking to escalate to war, or they are, some particular analytic line. It's actually quite hard to recognize once you've moved from the line, because you feel safe in the analytic space that you've been, that you've carved out, because the community agrees, maybe you're sort of in that space, right? And so as facts are changing, it's sometimes hard to get folks to recognize it's changed. Like, I think we're now in a new space and we have to have a new assessment and do that. And what that can sometimes do, if you're in that space where things have changed, but you're still stuck on the analytic line, right? Like, you may not put together the new facts in ways that help you see what's happening. And that's another kind of scenario that we've seen in different spaces. Does that make sense?
You haven't had the time to put all the pieces together for the different puzzle.
Yeah, or you're sort of not recognizing that you're still trying to stick those data points into your old analytic line instead of recognizing that the landscape has changed.
Right.
And you need to actually focus on something different or to recognize it in space. It is also true that we do things in certain ways. We're relying on, either on technology or on partners or other things that where we're sort of, we become too complacent with a particular scenario. And so part of what we try to do is think about how do we make sure that we're constantly checking on issues that are of importance to us where we may be over-reliant on a particular approach or, partner or scenario. But,
so in your job day to day, how do you get your information to do your job? And I'm specifically, what role does open source play in your job? I mean, I would answer the same question by saying, first thing I used to do is look at the daily apprehension numbers on the southern border, which would really depress me.
Yeah.
And I would look at it daily. I was too close to it. But then I read my Intel book and all the products in the Intel book.
Yeah.
And then if I had time left over, I'd read the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, and then the New York Post to see how the newspapers were covering what I knew to be reality from what I had just read.
Yeah.
But there was clearly a role, especially at DHS, for what gets public, what gets reported publicly.
Yeah.
But what role does that play for you?
It just reminds me, before I answer do you remember President Obama used to read magazines, like a ton of magazines. It used to terrify me because I was not reading all those magazines, and there'd be some question that would come up. You'd be like, wait a minute, where did that come from? Like, what was the, so for me, particularly because we do the PB, like I start with that usually very early in the morning and go through thing. And the thing about the PB is you've got the articles that are for the president, but you also have generally your briefer picks out for you a whole series of other articles that are being published across the community from other elements, and it gives you, it's maybe 40 or 50 different memos or pieces or things like that, at least for me. And I go through that first. And it is, in a way, it's my favorite part of the day because it is such a remarkable thing to see what the U.S. government is capable of producing across so many different issues. And often you'll have things in there that might be a think piece or, trying to get at the strategic issues instead of the tactical. And it can prompt your thinking on a variety of things. And so that is where I start. Then, to your point, there's a combination of management issues and then sort of outside external sources. And I try to do, we have a collection of a roundup of different papers and so on from around the country that I kind of try to skim through to make sure I have a good feel for how things are being thought through and framed, particularly on issues related to us. And I do find that useful in weird ways. Like, it's not often, I don't know how you experienced it, but it's not often that it's something that I've not heard of before in the national security space, but it may be a framing that's different or an opinion, and something, and it makes me think about, are we asking the right question? Because so much of our work is about, you're producing an answer to a question, generally. You may not be answering the right question, right? Like, that is actually a fundamental piece of how we can get it wrong for a policymaker who needs to make a decision. And so that helps me, I find, in thinking about these issues.
So a little bit of inside baseball here, inside national security legal baseball, which I know you will enjoy, sort of a Charlie Savage type question.
Yeah.
So
that's already inside baseball, legal.
Right.
Let's go for it.
There's the whole realm of classified information and the ability to classify something as TS, secret, confidential, stems from the president's commander-in-chief powers. There's no law that says X shall be classified or X shall be classified at a certain level. And the president has the executive authority himself or herself to declassify something without going through a process. In theory, a president could say, I'm meeting with this foreign leader and I have this really, really sensitive piece of intel, and I've decided 5 minutes before this meeting to share it with this person. And I have the authority to do that. But that's not how it works in reality, right?
No, I mean, you know this well, but there's executive orders, so the president's authority being used to set up processes for doing various classification issues, including declassification.
Right, but the president himself, depending on who you're dealing with, I suppose, the president himself tends to follow his own process for following what's in executive orders and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'm straying into something here that's a little sensitive. Okay. All right. Okay. I get the vibe. All right. Okay. So, here's a question I always ponder myself. Given how the sophistication of our intelligence community and our intelligence capabilities have evolved over the last 22 and a half years since 9/11, could another terrorist attack on our homeland, the scale of a 9/11, happen again? I know that's a difficult question. Nothing is guaranteed. I'll ask it in a leading way.
Yeah.
I tend to believe that something like another 9/11, kinetic, given how we've learned from the lessons, given how we've evolved, could not happen. And that stems in part from my own experience observing how we have been able to detect such plots at their earliest stages now, given the sophistication of our intelligence community, our law enforcement, and so forth. But how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, look, as you say, you sort of never want to rule out the possibility, and
Right.
that also
Don't want to be
somehow
accused of
that
a
you're not
failure
being-
of imagination either.
And,
right.
Exactly, and also
Right.
that you're not being sufficiently vigilant, for which we think we do have to continue to be. There's no question, and I think, but you're absolutely right that in the context of terrorism in particular, like, we did learn a lot of lessons. We do have an extraordinary sort of function and capacity in the U.S. government to address these threats. We've done a lot of degradation of the major, sort of foreign terrorist organizations, such that they're not in the same position that they were, so as to be able to create the threat. But I think the thing that I find particularly challenging, and when I think about, another 9/11, maybe it's not through the terrorism lens, right? Like, it is.
Right.
There are a lot of challenges that we're facing in the context of, for example, cyber, right? And while cyber may not manifest itself in one huge attack that kills as many people as were obviously tragically killed in 9/11, there is a bit of a death by 1,000 cuts, and there are some pretty extraordinary attacks and potential
Right.
in the context of cyber. And one could imagine ways in which that would manifest itself in concerning ways. There's so many other aspects of our work that we worry about, whether it's bio or other things, and we're constantly trying to think through what are the range of issues. And I think that one of the things that, at least, I know I've been trying, and there's so many in the government that do this too, but just is to learn some of the lessons that we learned in the context of counterterrorism and bring them into these other areas to see, and it's definitely not a perfect match in a whole series of spaces, but the integration that we created in the context of counterterrorism, the capacity to move from national security through to law enforcement in ways that allow us to basically manage threat in a much more effective way, to work together across agencies and compartments, is really important. And when I look at cyber, I see we've come a long way. We're still not quite where we are on counterterrorism in terms of the level of integration and the capacity to work
I was going to ask
across.
you that next. How do you assess where we are in terms of our cyber defenses against bad cyber actors?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, to be honest, like, we've come a long way in that space, and
Yeah.
I mean, NSA deserves tremendous credit in this space, as do others. Like, it is really, we have gotten much better at this, but at the same time, when you look at, we focus, of course, traditionally on state actors and proxies of state action in the intelligence community, and nation states are a challenge in cyber. Everybody's aware of that. We put that out in our annual threat assessment, and we move forward. But the reality is, it is such a low barrier to entry, and it is becoming so much easier with things like ransomware and so on for folks to not just engage in attacks, but engage in major ones, and they are going after the underbelly of, the healthcare sector, the, education, other places. So there's continue to be significant challenges, and that's going to be another thing that's going to require the country, I think, to get more effective at dealing with, because, in addition to the IC's role in that, which is obviously critical, and other agencies like DHS and FBI and others that are on the front lines of so much of this work, it's also about all of us getting better at cyber hygiene, the really basic things that make us more resilient in those moments.
Something like 80% of critical infrastructure in this country is in private hands.
Yeah.
Right. So what is it that I haven't asked you, but what is it that a public audience like this, you'd want them to know and understand about today's intelligence community? That your average American, to the extent there is such a person, doesn't fully understand, but should appreciate?
Well, first of all, one thing I would want an audience to know, I have a feeling this is a pretty sophisticated audience when it comes to the intelligence community, but regardless, it's an extraordinary place to work. It is full of really talented, thoughtful people who get to do something, participate in a mission that is ultimately meaningful on a daily basis. That does not mean that every moment is great. I am not suggesting that. There are definitely times when you feel like you're hitting your head against a wall, but it's extraordinary on the good days, and it is unmatched in terms of the colleagues and the feeling of being part of a broader team that is actually trying to achieve something useful. And the reality is that no matter what your expertise or talent is, we could use you in the IC. I mean, it is fundamentally true, and that is something that I find people think about sort of, clear, I've gotten my PhD in nonproliferation, or, I'm doing this on whatever. The reality is, yes, we are particularly focused on STEM, but we also want liberal arts majors. We want folks who, have medicine in their background, who are interested in climate, who are folks who, deal in public health security or pharmacy. It is because we're trying to understand the world. And so we need to have people who have talent and expertise and knowledge about every aspect of society and global work. And it really is in my view, unmatched intellectually in terms of just making you feel like you are learning something new every day, and you have the opportunity to do so, and to help us as a government make better decisions as a consequence of what what insights you're able to provide as a consequence of the work that we do. So that is one thing I would want them to know. The second thing I think is that it is so much of, I felt coming into this position and continue to feel that a critical aspect of the work that hopefully I'm able to contribute to and do in the IC is in engendering greater trust between the intelligence community and the American people. This is fundamental to us doing our job. In other words, if we provide warning and you don't trust us, then we're not going to be very effective at providing that warning. And that's so much of what we're geared to try to help to provide. And that's just one example, but it really is something where I think, we've all seen how the public's trust in public institutions generally has degraded. And while the IC still remains relatively trusted in some respects, it is a consistent issue that I see across a range of things as we look to try to get reauthorization of our Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act authorities so that we can do our job. And we recognize reforms are important and useful and ready for all of those, but it's fundamentally a conversation about trust, and I cannot. First of all, I just cannot tell you how such good faith that people come to work and try to do the best that they can to work within the rules that we have assigned to them and the constraints that the IC exists under. And you cannot, I had a professor come in who we asked an expert panel to help us on advice on something. And he said something to me that I thought was quite extra. It was actually, I think he won't mind that I mentioned it, was Jack Goldsmith.
Yes.
And professor at Harvard, he's, in different spaces. And he said, what people don't realize, I think, is just how concerned the average person in the intelligence community is about making sure that they're following the law in every possible respect. Like the amount of time and effort that goes into thinking that through, trying to make sure that we're doing everything exactly right is really true. And it is not that we don't make mistakes at times, but it is rather that there is genuinely a desire to get it right in every respect and to recognize that with the extraordinary authorities that we have and the fact that we have to do so much of our work in secret, that it is our responsibility to do it with great care and concern to ensure that we are actually fulfilling the responsibility that we have under a democratic society to be an intelligence community that is governed by the law and is ultimately subject to the accountability mechanisms that we put it to. And I think that is I wish that more people could get inside and see that sometimes and recognize just how critical that is to every single one of us to ensure that we can do the best job that we can, but subject to the constraints and the values ultimately that we hold dear, because that's exactly what we're fighting for ultimately, is to allow the country to be able to live up to the promise that we know we can have in the society. All right, I'm off my soapbox. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's all right.
But
I invited you onto your soapbox. Last question for me. Stay on the soapbox, please.
Okay.
A number of people, usually in college or law school, will ask me, how do I get into the intelligence community? I want a career in the intelligence community. What do I do? How do I make that happen? Who do I call? Who do I apply to?
Come up to me afterwards. Let me know. We will give you a phone number. No, it's, first of all, I really would welcome it, and please don't feel as if, we go out, my principal deputy and I, Stacey Dinkson, try to get out as much as we can, not just to universities for recruiting, but also to high schools, and to talk to them about what the intelligence community does, to try to help them plant a seed in a sense. And increasingly we are offering in the intelligence community internships. And, so that when you're actually in high school, you might be able to do an internship in a part of the intelligence community. But also, certainly, if you get into college and you're wanting to test it out. And we encourage people that are a little bit skeptical, who don't know us, who want to understand what we do, to do those types of internships, to test it out. And we have a www.intelligencecareers.gov. If you actually go to that website, you will find a place for you to find out about internships, a place for you to connect to different elements. And, if you're interested in the FBI, if you're interested in CIA, NSA, et cetera, you can click through to each of them. But that's not a bad way to start. And part of what I also, when I hear from folks who feel as if, we're not happy. We think the intelligence community does good work in the following areas, but we're a little concerned about X, Y, or Z. Well, come in and make a difference. If you feel like you want to, if there's something you see that you want to change, and I think that's a good thing in the sort of younger generation that's looking up at it, then the best way to do it is to come in and actually help to be part of that change. And so really welcome folks from every walk of life to check us out. And
Okay. Director Haines, thank you very much for spending an hour with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.